Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. My name's Don Robinson. Welcome to the November edition of SMAF, SM Advanced Forum, your monthly update and a pine and wine about the general news of the day. They're smiling in the other boxes about the general news of the day in the streaming industry. Oh my God, it's been busy. As usual, I am joined by my three co-hosts, or two of my three co-hosts, at least, Tim and Mark. Tim, are you out there?
I am, Dom. How are you doing today?
I'm all good. How are you?
I'm doing quite well. I'm really happy we had that extra hour that those of us in the US have not yet experienced. Sorry that I tried to come on an hour early to, have this, but I'm glad to be here.
Apologies to the US people for my posting earlier. I forgot that the automation didn't quite correct for the time zones. I think we should put time zones on the discussion list because I think they're actually a relevant thing to our conversation. So Tim, add that to the list and we'll come back to time zones in a minute. Tim, take us into our guests and tell us who's with us.
Well, first let's go to Mark because Mark's here as a co-host.
I'm here too, Dom. What about me?
You're right. I'm sorry.
I'm
trying to press buttons and make sure that I don't get mute and feedback and stuff while also making sure Tim takes the show forward. So over to you.
No worries. But to your point, I do think we should make the entire hour about the demise of daylight savings time and British summertime. They're ridiculous.
And C,
I'd rather stick to summertime all year round.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I think Dom told me we should just live in UTC time, so we're UTC -5 here. So
what does it matter if you start your breakfast meetings at 10 p.m.? It's like normal behavior for us, isn't it?
So Mark, Eternals is coming up, being launched this week, right?
Yep. The Eternals red carpet was a week and a half ago now. Went well. We have a brand new co-located facility here in Los Angeles with the Switch, and it worked perfectly. And yeah, everyone was very happy. So that's under our belt now, and on to the next thing.
And how was Halloween for the littles?
It was good. They were Pooh and Piglet, and they cleaned up. We were out for 2 hours. Lots and lots of candy. It was good.
Which, of course, you have the dad tax as well. So you're like 1 for you, 3 for.
I mean, they're 21 months old, so it's like 95% dad tax. Dad's eating all the candy. Sorry.
All right, and we'll go to our guests. Nak, first of all, go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about you and your time in the industry.
Sure. Sorry. So I'm Nak. I'm currently living in Barcelona, and I'm very, very new to the streaming industry. I'm guessing that's what you asked. So I started in September. So I'm guessing this is my 3rd month, and I'm basically just trying to learn and digest everything I'm seeing, everything that is thrown at me so far. So I'm happy to be here and listen to what you will be sharing, and hopefully I can contribute a bit my own experience with you. And yeah.
The great company that does measurement in this space, Nice People at Work, or NPAW. What's your role there?
Sorry, could you repeat
so
that?
You were a little bit doom and gloom before this all started. You in a classroom full of children. You said it's touched.
Interesting. Is that you on there? Yeah.
Apparently I invoked the spirit of Zoom Halloween or something.
You've talked about diffusing the doomsday.
Somebody's got a window open. It's a straight Zoom bombing.
Are you?
Okay. I'm hoping that wasn't me.
I think we're all hoping it wasn't any of us.
It sounded very British though, Dom, so I'm sort of thinking.
I'm having a look through.
That was very weird. Okay.
So Nak, I was asking what your role was. I was asking Nak what her role was at Nice People at Work, because obviously measurement companies in the industry.
Yeah, so I'm a product manager working at NPAW that you might have heard of. So really data focused and trying to understand also a bit the data world and all the data that is out there in the streaming industry. And yes, there are lots.
Well, and one of the things that I always say is that we have the videos we do, and then we have the metadata. And frankly, the metadata is much more interesting to me than the videos, because I want to know how people consume,
Right.
etc. Let's see, then Damien is our other guest.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Damien. I'm actually in this industry for slightly longer. I started that as a student, as the original team developing VLC media player. And since then, I've been around looking specifically at video encoding and video delivery. So with Anivia, which I co-founded initially, and now that Anivia has been acquired by Atem, I'm running the product organization at Atem.
Ah, very nice.
I was joking with Damien when we were lining up about 20 minutes ago that every time I see a traffic cone on top of a traffic light, I think of him.
Why is that?
Legacy of VLC.
VLC legacy, that's true. That's true. So let's see. First topic we want to talk about is IBC. By the time we hit next month, that event will be underway.
We'll be at it. I'll be at it, I think. I'll be doing SMAF from IBC.
Yeah, and I know, Dom, that's a bit of a switch for you. You weren't really certain you were going to go to the show. What sort of drawn you to that?
We were asked if we might sponsor the CDN Alliance drinks party for their first formal meeting, and it seemed like a highly appropriate one-off marketing spend for ideas. So
does that involve being at the beach in December, or
going to start at the beach at 4 o'clock and then go to the CDN Alliance opening thing at 6 o'clock? And I do hope everyone tuned in and tuning in and that I know will turn up, because well, in that way at least 6 of us will go. So it'll be brilliant. All my friends.
What specific day is that?
It's on the Friday of IBC.
Friday,
It was okay. Friday, 4 o'clock at the beach, 15 years now, apart from last year. So I've got some catching up to do. But I'm not going in a canal this year because I'll die if I'd go in December.
Especially December. Nak, are you planning to be at IBC? I know you're new in the industry.
Yes, I actually just recently had a chat and asked if I wanted to go because it was going to be cold. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, there is a very high chance I'll be attending.
Very good. And Damien, what about you?
And it's
sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was just gonna say it's gonna be first time, so I'm interested to see where it is, the number of people after COVID, etc.
Yeah, on our side from Paris, it's not going to be that cold. So from Barcelona, I can definitely imagine you will find that very cold. But from Paris, not that much. So yes, we will be getting there probably with a very reduced team. We're not expecting that many customers, but at some point, IBC being IBC, a lot of those companies just need to be there.
Mm-hmm.
So
are you running a stand, Damien?
Yeah, we will still run a stand.
Cool.
And on top of that,
coffee, yes.
You're welcome. From any time. But on top of that, there's this organization where if you want to keep the right position for your stand, you need to be there. Otherwise, you're going to lose it. So this is also part of the reason why some of those companies will be attending. And I believe at the moment, there will be probably a better attendance on the exhibitor than the attendance on the participants and the visitors.
Yeah.
Partly because they want to keep their positions.
And it's interesting that you say that because, of course, NAB here went virtual with the idea of everybody who had their stand set up for IBC in October, or NAB in October, will transfer that to April. So essentially that took care of that. Infocom, which is another smaller show here in the States, chose to do that. And as you said, companies came not to show new things, but to sort of catch up with potential customers that were there. The numbers I heard was it was about 20% of the typical visitor flow, but also to do precisely what you said, Damien, which is hold their spot for when the next event happens in July. So it'll be quite interesting. Dom, I know obviously things are shifting back and forth in Europe like they are here in the States. Have there been any sort of pandemic changes in the Netherlands that could potentially affect IBC?
I'm waiting on it. Mark's going to keep me in tune on that. Obviously, he's there. He's following in Dutch what the Prime Minister there's deciding. So he'll probably send me a message maybe any minute. He's tuned in to let me know what the latest is. But there he is. Oh no, he's probably 8 seconds behind, so he's going to catch up in a minute. But he's going to let us know that it's all clear and all on. But we're watching things. We've got the Greening of Streaming launch event in December. On the 8th, so I'm coming back a day earlier than I would normally come back from IBC, just to make sure that 48-hour sort of faff around doing the post-travel COVID testing is complete before I have to go to Parliament. But Parliament itself is also waving flags that they're only working 2 weeks ahead, so they may turn around and let us know that we're going to have to do everything as a virtual event anyway. So it's a fluid situation, but I don't know if you're the same, Damien. I think at some point you've just got to put your stake in the ground and make a plan, I think.
Absolutely. One of the things that changes is that it's highly likely that IBC will be with masks. So two weeks back, I was under the feeling that it might be without masks, but now, with the latest announcement from the Dutch government, this is going to be with masks. Yeah. So long days with masks.
I won't recognize anyone. It'll just be too difficult. So
yeah. So let's share some coffees. That's going to have time to put masks off.
We get a T-shirt with Bob written on it.
Mark, I don't know in California. I know again your mask mandates sort of go back and forth. It does seem that going to a restaurant and eating, is one of those points where you can actually take the mask off in public. How is it around the broadcast and production industry in LA at the moment?
It's a little bit more relaxed than it has been. The show that we did for Marvel last week was less. I don't think, we didn't put up any shields in the truck. Everyone was masked, of course, in the truck, out on the carpet, certainly not. So, it's an interesting mix. LA has a pretty hardcore mandate for, mask wearing indoors, and new regulations with regard to what they can do at restaurants and that sort of thing. But I'm planning a Thanksgiving dinner for 25 people now, and I'm told that the risk factor is less than 1% in San Diego County. So
now, will you be required to have windows open and fans running? Because I know there was
I'm taking many precautions, yes, but yeah, I understand the risk factor is very low in our particular area for gatherings of less than a certain number of people. So
Tim, Mark's from San Diego. He hasn't got windows. It's just got balls. It's like Brazil. It's just bars. That's it.
The whole thing is just a big hut, just a big thatched hut. Yeah.
Listen, Mark De Jong has just popped into the chat room, and he's highlighted that so far no masks expected for IBC, only if new measures kick in. So it's all green at the moment. So
that leads to a really nice sort of segue to another topic we wanted to talk about, which was sort of the evolution of home setups. I think when we all started this, back in March of 2020. It was like, okay, I've got my laptop, I've got an acceptable space in the house where the dog's not barking too loudly, the children aren't running behind me, and general chaos is ensuing elsewhere. But now, and Dom, I know you've got a beautiful setup, and if you want to cut to it when you start talking to show people, now it seems like we've got people really sort of investing in better quality. Is the assumption they're doing that because they figure this is going to be around for quite a bit longer than, sort of everybody's expected?
I don't know. I didn't get my room knocked through and have a server farm put in like you, which is kind of cool. But,
Yeah, well, it actually replaces the whole map that I used to have behind me, but it is real.
There you go. Oh, look.
Especially like the antique typewriter, too. It's a nice touch.
That was from my wedding in March 2020. And which we had to disinvite, a couple hundred people. But what's really cool is the table that it sits on is an old school, early Burroughs table that has a little tag underneath the typewriter that says if CRT is on this table, and CRT is in quotes, typewriter pad must be underneath it at all times. So it's an honest to goodness, sort of early stage computing table. That's why I decided to put a 1950s typewriter on it.
That and the drop ceiling and the fluorescent lighting, and I expect to see a stack of 8-inch floppies behind you. It's a nice vintage look. There we go. Oh, that's not a stack of vintage.
I actually do have 2 boxes in the storage room across the hall. I have 2 boxes of floppies, some of which have never been opened, which means they're probably worth something.
That's true.
Anyway, sorry. So at home setups, Dom, this was your topic, obviously.
Yeah. I mean, when we started SMAF, 3 years ago, I felt like I was on the pinnacle of things with like 7 monitors and a little vision mixer and all my bits and pieces. But now I just feel like my stuff's all antiquated and everyone's got much cooler setups. So I don't know if you guys have shared that. Mark and I were joking before we went live about the amount of people who got sort of circle ring light reflection in their glasses coming on air and in sort of just your average Zoom setup. Have you guys evolved your rigs at all? Do you have a rig?
I mean, what are we talking about when we say home setups? Are we talking about home setups for being on camera or home setups for production?
For Zoom, for people talking on Zoom and, talking to your granny on Zoom, literally non-production people who've just gone, oh, I want my camera to look a bit better. Oh, I want to be able to do more things. Or are you still largely looking up people's noses at their chin on a?
No, I mean, I think it also depends on the sector. I mean, if I'm talking to people over Zoom, they're probably in the media production space, and they're probably more savvy than the average Fortune 500 grunt. So I see a lot of
your clients just left you, Mark. Your clients,
right. No, but I see a lot of bokeh effects, really nice lighting, uplit, lots of. I mean, you got to appreciate the fact that we deal with a lot of influencer based content these days, right? And everyone's looking at these makeup demos and cooking demos and things like that on Instagram and TikTok and YouTube that are all share this kind of uplit knickknacks on a mantle sort of motif, and I think everyone finds it easy to replicate that, and so you get kind of a uniform look, but it's pleasant. It's
so does everyone in California actually walk around like on their all the time?
Right. Yes,
and
exactly.
Are there feng shui Zoom interior designers now in California? Because I would figure that would be the place.
There have to be. Yeah.
All right, Damien, Mac, what about you all? I mean, have you seen people increase sort of the quality of what they do, or is it all sort of still just wherever in my apartment or house I can find a spot that's quiet?
On my side, I can probably see 2 different populations. So on one side, we have people that spend a lot of time on Zoom that used to have let's say, a good setup and that have invested in a very good setup. And on the other side, which is very interesting, is this population that is not used to be on Zoom at all. So looking at those developers, a year and a half ago, when the first lockdown started, the first sprint reviews, sprint demos, everyone was on Zoom with absolutely no setup, and not even the quiet place you mentioned before. None of that. Was a kids running around, was a door, everything. What I can see is nowadays, all of them, or almost all of them, have managed to get a decent setup. So not a professional one like the one from Dom's or whoever's, but a decent setup so that at least they can go for a meeting and have a good meeting. So definitely there's been some improvement, not the same kind of improvements, but some improvements. And on top of that, I have to say, I've seen in my teams, I've seen many people actually moving houses just to make sure that they've got more space.
Wow.
And actually even one more room in order to have a decent place to do that. Because especially in Paris, a lot of them were actually living in small flats and nowhere actually to be able to do a Zoom meeting. So a lot of them actually moved to get bigger flats.
It's interesting you say that because, one idea would be if you're in a house, add on an addition to the house, but at least here in the States, the construction people are so far behind on projects that they don't even have time to come do your house addition. So it's easier to go buy somewhere else, as you say. Nak, what about you?
Yeah, I actually agree to a certain extent with Damien. I, for instance, had to create a space in my own apartment, and I know Persian apartments, they're quite small, but it's no different here in Barcelona as well, in certain areas, I mean. So I had to also prepare my little corner and make it look nice, as you can see behind me. But I also saw lots of efforts from my previous company before I moved on to NPA. We were given sort of a mini training on how to do Zoom calls or WebEx, because we were using WebEx. So the idea was, if we could even upgrade to better cameras or better lighting, etc. So I really agree with that. And I had some ex-colleagues or friends that really went, took the next step and basically live streamed their room to show that they were available when working. So I've seen quite a lot of extremes, at least for me, but I do like this evolution.
So in the States, we had the problem where Amazon was backlogged by about 2 to 3 months for web cameras at one point. Was there a similar issue in Europe as well?
I mean, I had to buy a new computer. So in terms of computers or maybe any other electronics, I must say there were less, and that maybe impacted the prices. I'm not gonna say maybe, it impacted the prices. So yeah, I think there were less options. And as you said, less electronics, cameras, microphones out there, yeah.
What we've seen on our side is actually most of the developers, they have, let's say, up-to-date laptops and so on, so with decent camera. But as a company, we provided, screens, headsets, mics, etc., to all of the employees, so that they can have a good setup. And this is, I believe, a general statement on this industry. Most of the companies I know have been providing that to everyone. So when you look at this Zoom setup, actually, most of the employees have been given screen, headset, mics, chairs, actually to be comfortable at home to work and to be on a Zoom meeting. So that contributes as well to this evolution that we've seen.
I've got a question actually for Nak and Damien. You guys, pre-pandemic, were you guys used to working in office environments?
Yes.
Yeah, both of you. So, because when you mentioned a minute ago, Nat, that the members of the team or people you knew who were live streaming constantly to show their availability. I mean, I've worked from home since I left school, so the pandemic didn't change a thing for me. And I think Tim and Mark, you've largely worked sort of from wherever.
Yeah, in fact,
coming up on 20 years now. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is my first office in 20 years that I'm physically sitting in right now as of last month. So. And
so I find it. Back to Nak and Damien. I find it. Has it been a welcome transition, or do you find yourself more productive working in your own space? Because I find the times I've contracted and worked in other offices for any length of time, I found it just insanely distracting. It's like having Zoom calls on, many of them all the time, and I think there's for me it wouldn't work. I wonder how that's been for you as a contrast.
On our side at ATEM, we've seen multiple different faces, and we'll see whether you've seen the same on your side, Mac. But during the first phases, when people were all at home, after a couple of weeks, making sure everything was working and so on, people were really, all of them saying, "That's great, I'm much more productive," and so on and so on. So when the time came to go back to the office, actually nobody wanted to be in the office. So they wanted to continue to be home and continue like that. And after some time now, basically, I believe since September, we're seeing people really wanting to be back at the office, to spend more time at the office, because they actually see the difference. They see what, they are missing meeting with colleagues. And they are missing this informal communication that you can have at the office. So
I will say, yeah, if you're talking about, efficiency and productivity, I'm far more productive at home with the stuff that I have to do myself, where I just, put my nose to the grindstone and knock some, proposals out and things like that. Far more efficient, obviously. But once and only once since the beginning of the pandemic, I traveled up to our new facility in Marin, and was able to sit down with the team, and it was 2 days of drinking from the fire hose. I just, everyone had ideas and discussions that they wanted to have, and we could go into just pop into a room and sit down and talk about something. And I ended up with copious, notes afterwards, and all these great ideas and, things that I wanted to pursue, and some of which I haven't gotten around to pursuing yet. But it was, a different kind of productivity. I feel like to drive innovation in your organization, it's necessary. You really do need that the hallway water cooler conversations to drive that, or you're a little bit doomed. Would you agree?
Do you think that works as a constant thing? I mean,
I think having a mix. I think having a mix is.
Sorry, Matt.
Yeah, I was just gonna. I think having a mix is the ideal. When you have a few days at home and a couple days at the office, and I think that's what the model that a lot of people are at. Now maybe they spend 2 days in the office when they need to, and they're home the rest of the time. I think that's ideal if you can manage it.
In some ways, it reminds me of the conversations about events. As a whole, I think that events as a format. I think the information that used to be delivered in the theatres of conferences and events, I personally think it's better delivered over webinar and online, where you can take your time, you're not distracted, it's easy to get to, it's convenient, and so on. The serendipity of the networking is something that you want to just go to a meetup. You don't need the lecture theatre stuff going on. It just sort of, it's a flagpole to gather around, but actually it's kind of incidental. If someone was speaking for 20 minutes in the morning and that was it, probably be enough to bring the right people together and have the right serendipity, which is a different, I think, a bit of a different model. Like with the office, I can see companies going, let's all get in on Thursday. That's it. And actually let the rest of it be booking some meetings with other people, but rather than dragging employees in all the time every day just to hope for some serendipity, because I think after a while, a lot of that strikes me as noise to me.
Let me add too, remember we did the enterprise video survey a couple months ago with streaming media. We asked a very specific question to people. Do you expect in the next 18 months to travel more or less internationally and more or less domestically? And do you expect to be more in the office in that 18 months or less? And what we found consistently was people said, less international travel, which makes sense because we're still all sorting things out. But that they also expected to do a lot more virtual meetings or hybrid meetings than they did fully in-person meetings. So Dom, sort of to your point, I think one of the things we need to start thinking about is, if somebody works better from home 4 days a week, do you force them back into the office? If somebody works better from the office 4 days a week, do you force them back home? And trying to figure out that model and do hybrid events that feel equally participatory for those who are at home or together. How do we get to that? Zoom is not the answer for that by any means, because this is let's sit and give our full attention to this piece.
One-to-one, isn't it? Yeah.
You don't get the serendipity portion of it. And yet, even as we've gone through almost now 2 years of this, nobody's really come up with a model to do good hybrid events, at least in my mind. So,
well, I haven't been to the real world events myself, which have had the hybrid edge to it. So we'll have to ask you next month, whether going back to in person actually, worked well.
Yeah.
So let's switch over to another topic, and this is a bit more technical, and it's sort of a Mark and Damien question. But 2110, which is a SMPTE standard, NDI, which is sort of a de facto standard around IP delivery and remote production. Where do those things stand? Mark, I know you've done a lot of REMI, and obviously, Damien, you've said that your company has used 2110. Just give me sort of the lay of the land on that.
I'll defer to Damien to talk about 2110 because I honestly have never used it other than having some equipment that happened to support 2110, and we've done some tests and that sort of thing. But in a real production environment, if we're doing video transport over an unmanaged network, it's typically NDI, just because it's there, it's open source, it's very easy to implement. There's a huge amount of support for it now. Didn't used to be, but there's a massive community built around it now. And now, as of today, I believe this morning, they've finally released the new version of NDI 5, which supports this thing called Ndi Bridge, which enables a host remote model setup where you have one publicly available IP, and you could have a number of different production locations all hitting that host and providing NDI sources in a two-way methodology with support for tally, with support for PTZ camera control, with like all the things that come along with NDI. So I think it's going to really open up some cool stuff, and I can't wait to really put it to the task and test it out. Damien, is any of those ancillary? Here's where I expose my ignorance here. Are any of those ancillary functions supported in 2110? I know it supports tally, but does it support like camera control and shading and things like that?
No, I don't think so. Really not. So 2110 is really mostly about replacing SDI. Mm-hmm. This is really the way we see it. So SDI, you need a cable, you need, and 2110 just runs over Ethernet. So that's an easy way to replace SDI. But so far, what we've seen is just replacement of SDI. Whether it's SDI or 2110, it's pretty much the same features. And also pretty much the same limitations, because at the end, if you look at the 2110 link, this is uncompressed, meaning that it's huge bandwidths. So you cannot really carry that very long. So it's good within the head-end. So in between two equipments in a given data center, instead of an SDI link, you put a 2110 link. That's perfect. But if you want to do anything more than that, and especially moving from a data center to the cloud or from one location to another, then 2110 is very likely not the right protocol for that. So yes, 2110 runs perfectly smoothly. It's a great, let's say, replacement to SDI, but it's, since it's uncompressed, it still has a lot of drawbacks.
From a network perspective, and also I find that the support for 2110 is typically only on the very high-end equipment, the Sony and Panasonic workflows and that sort of thing for very large broadcast endeavors. Whereas NDI support is also in those things, but also at the very other end of the scale with the Matrox and AJA and manufacturers like that supporting it. So I feel like it's a lot easier to implement it in a lower end production workflow or a hybrid workflow, and I feel like that's the lion's share of what everyone's doing now, as opposed to these very large network broadcast traditional kind of productions. There's a lot more of this kind of lower end production happening that is perfectly acceptable for what we would normally term broadcast viewing. So I find it. I feel like the NDI is going to win, at least in the short term.
Well, I was going to add something to that, Mark, too. I remember talking about quiet places. I remember talking to Andrew Cross probably 5 years ago, right after NDI came out. The only place close to his booth at IBC that we could talk was to go downstairs to where the restrooms were and stand and have a conversation. One of the things that was interesting then was they had brought me into to San Antonio to look at their Skype for Business solution, which essentially The idea was it was acting like an MCU, and NDI at that point was essentially only a point-to-point within a local area network. They obviously deprecated the stuff that was focused around Skype for Business because they got NDI to bring it to, they were able to evolve NDI to that point where, as you say, essentially it's acting now in NDI 5 almost like an MCU in the traditional video conferencing or web conferencing sense.
I don't know if I'd say that. I feel like if you're talking about like their talk show appliances and the like the Skype support for that, the advantage there was that you could have anyone with a Skype client as a source, right? This doesn't replace that. NDI Bridge is really for point to point, and it requires, you know, hardware or at least some relatively advanced software on both ends to, you know, produce that connection. They still have, I mean, if you're talking about new tech specifically, they still haven't figured out anything to replace Skype now that Microsoft is officially deprecating Skype and everything Skype related. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. I think, you know, if they do anything, it'll be a WebRTC based sort of deal. But there are so many third-party solutions out there for that. I think they're probably going to just let those be the ecosystem, and that'll be that.
This is a question. Can I just chip in a little question? Damien, you might know the answer to this. Is NDI not a fork of Siphon?
I don't know the answer to that.
Because Siphon's been around for a very long time. It's prolific in VJing apps and so on and so forth. It's open source. It's really widely supported in the prosumer software world. Quite often, it's got technical reviews where it's less CPU intensive than NDI. Years ago, it used to have a high quality rating, but that I think quality at that level is probably something that's going to eventually chase itself out. But it's interesting. I would just wonder whether there's not a further alternative which has been almost forgotten because it's not promoted by its own open source community in the way that NDI is. But anyway, it's one of those things that seems to have been forgotten.
And I would argue too, I mean, NDI in OBS, I don't think that's sophisticated software. I think it's powerful processing on machines. So I hear you, Mark, about it may not be the same thing as talk show, but I think ultimately with a lot of software driven NDI now, we may be getting to that point where you have essentially chair control with an MCU. And then the natural next step is to essentially turn on something that allows it to be bidirectional if you choose, whether that bidirectional is simple metadata like the tallies, or whether that bidirectional includes intercoms, includes, you know, audio solutions and like that.
I think there's a massive hole in the market for something like that that really does support, you know, tally on the guest side and things like that. And if you want to base it on NDI, I think that's a total no-brainer. So we'll see if new tech comes up with it, or if somebody else, you know, some third party comes up with it based on NDI, but no one has yet, to my knowledge.
Yeah. So Nak, which company did you come from before you came into the space, and what are your sort of initial observations in the streaming industry, having been here a total of 42 days, I guess, something like that?
So I was at Gartner.
Okay.
And one of its business units, which was Gartner Digital Markets. And I come from a different background, which is more in sales and marketing, and always wanted to do the transition to product. So streaming was kind of a happy surprise when I got my new role as well. Mm-hmm. I think that the biggest change for me was the amount of information, and especially the amount of data that there is out there. There are, as you said in the beginning, that the metadata was much more interesting than the video itself. I totally agree. What is very interesting happens usually behind the scenes and behind the screen or the video player. So I find it very intriguing. I have a great support system so far, and I've been learning all about those metrics, industry standard metrics as well. So it's a really, really long learning curve for me, but I really like this industry. And it's also great to be not just a consumer for once, but also somebody who provides something with it, a product.
Nice.
Have you found interesting resources to learn? What sort of things have you found?
Yeah, I actually been cherry picking a lot, to be honest. So I keep bookmarking them when I find them. Well, I've of course seen the website of the conferences like IBC, etc., and checking their articles and blogs. Trying to follow also some other groups on LinkedIn that were recommended. What else? Also, any analysis or report done by, I don't know, let's say Hulu. They've done a report about consumption and the generation Z that is following us. So those kind of things are, let's say, what I will try to read on a daily basis at the moment. Yeah.
Awesome. And is the terminology fairly daunting? Because, you know, we're throwing around things like 2110 and NDI. And I asked that because one of the things that at Streaming Media, since I've now written there for almost 24 years, a couple of years ago, we did a back to basics set of articles that sort of explain the sort of basics. And then we did a glossary, and that glossary actually has a number of those terms. We did that because what we found is we're speaking to ourselves in the industry with shortened terminology that we know what it means, or we think we know what it means. Has that been daunting as well?
Kind of. Every single time I found myself Googling, a word, a metric or something, just to understand what it meant. I actually started by reading a lot on the ecosystem of streaming. So that gave me a lot of, things to think about. And also, I would be really interested to see that glossary and bookmark it as well.
Oh, I'm going to plug something actually from Nick Kremensky, who we had on a few.
Awesome.
Do you know awesome.video? It's a great a primary resource which Nick maintains, and he's gathered many terms in there, and he's also got great links to articles which break out how fundamental functions work, which is just a good resource to become familiar with. It's very handy.
I believe it's not only useful for the people that are new to the industry. Yeah. Because you have to keep in mind that this industry is, pretty big. If you look from the camera to actually the player and the device, on the OTT, the satellite, or the production, the delivery, the encoding, very few people actually know the whole ecosystem. Yeah. And within the industry, when you move from one role to another role, then you end up with a kind of, part of it but part of the ecosystem you don't know, and part of those standards you don't know, etc., etc. So it's very useful to have those kind of tools, glossaries, and videos, even for the people in the industry for the past 10 or 20 years, because still there is a lot to learn.
And I'm going to plug, Dom, obviously the work we're doing on the greening of streaming. One of the things that we fundamentally is we're looking at the balance of power consumption, price, and performance, is we realized very early on that if you come from different parts of the industry, you think about even those three terms differently. So power for a camera, you're talking about, what's the battery life and, as you shoot. Power for a device that's sitting in a data center is completely different. And Dom's been taking on the task there. And I went back and looked at the glossary I had done, to sort of point him towards some of those things. He's taking on that task, even within the sustainability and power consumption portion of the industry, to create a lexicon. Dom, do you want to?
Yeah, it had a complexity problem, actually. So we've been it's been a really interesting initial working group to run, just trying to come up with a common set of terms and frames within the greening and streaming. So many different angles. It definitely hit a complexity because there were so many terms. And we started to try to do it the wrong way around. It was more like we were trawling words looking for relevant ones. And so we're having a little bit of a repositioning. I need to have a chat with the other two working group leads a bit more in the next day or two about progress, because I think we're going to actually just postulate 4 or 5 measuring sticks and use those to work from, rather than try to effectively reduce them from the myriad of options. It's a very interesting. The wordsmithing of an industry can be quite I don't know. I still look back with pride that I came up with transmuxer, my little stamp on the industry. If you insert the right words at the right time and they become vernacular in an industry, it can really help people share meaning.
And what's always frustrating to me, Dom, is when somebody says transcoding when they really mean transrating or transmuxing. It's as if we have catch-all words that mean a number of things. So NAC, that glossary is actually streamingmedia.com/glossary. And you can, awesome. And then if you just do a search for streaming media back to basics in my last name, Siglin, you'll probably find a number of those articles from a few years ago. Eric, who's normally on here as one of the co-hosts, is the one who commissions those. And so, Dom, I think one of us is going to need to nudge him to, to sort of go back and do some more back to basics, as we're now 6 or 7 years along. So
it's going to be you, Tim. I take great pleasure in watching your inbox fill up.
Yeah, exactly. So, all right. So one other topic, it's sort of technical topic, low latency. And Damien, I know this is one you've brought up. This is something I've been working a lot in, and just low latency in general. Mark asked the question, what's the glass to glass expectation for people? And let me frame it this way. We just finished up a survey, did a keynote for it on Monday with Millicast, who's one of the companies who does WebRTC. They asked the question in the survey, which was an anonymous survey, what people's expectation was for low latency. Was it less than 1 second? Was it 1 to 3 seconds, or more than 3 seconds? The largest group said 3 to 5 seconds is completely acceptable. There was a lower percentage that said sub 1 second. Now, granted, there are use cases for each of those scenarios, but one of the arguments is RTMP has been around for quite some time, and everybody sort of got used to a 3-second delay. Where do we stand with low latency, and are we pushing something toward potential users that they don't necessarily need from a low latency standpoint?
So that's a great question. At the time, we've been working on that for quite some time, and I'm happy to share that. But Canal Plus, which is the leading pay TV operator, just launched low latency on their OTT service last week. So it's finally there. So when it comes to what do we mean by low latency, I would fully agree with what your statement, 3 to 5 seconds. And the reason for that is this is on average what is currently the latency of a TV service delivered through broadcast. So if you look at a DTT or a satellite service, this is about 3 to 5 seconds. And nobody has issue with that, including if you look at a sport event and you have some Twitter message at the same time with people that actually sit in the stadium in front of the event. The Twitter message probably gets 2 to 3 seconds, maybe 3 to 5 seconds to get to your phone. So no issue to have this few seconds, 3 to 5 seconds delay. The real issue is that most of the OTT service, right now, if they're running Dash or HLS, standard version of Dash or HLS, they're basically 10 to 15 seconds behind. So this is a real issue. So at the moment, I believe a big portion of the industry is looking at making their OTT service on the second screen, just like the same delay as the broadcast service on the main screen. So that if you switch from one screen to another, this is kind of smooth switch from one screen to another. So the expectation from our customer at that time for the delivery of a TV service would be within those 3 to 5 seconds for OTT. is there a requirement to have broadcast services below those 3 to 5 seconds? No, we haven't seen that. This is not the question. When our customers are evaluating different broadcast solutions, one with the other, the quality matters, the bandwidth matters, the cost matters, the whatever, all that matters. If you're within the 3 to 5 seconds and you come up with a solution with 2 seconds, nobody cares, because the industry adopted this 3 to 5 second. It's a bit like, at some point of time, it was about zapping time. The industry basically adopted the half a second to 1 second zapping time between two channels. No need to be below. Absolutely no need to be below. But if you come up with a solution that takes 3 seconds to zap from one channel to another, you're completely outside what's expected. So it's very important to have this idea of this expectation. And then I believe the next challenge for low latency is to be able to measure and to get the right KPIs and the right data to understand where the latency comes from. Because some of the customers might run 10 seconds behind. And this is part of the quality of experience. So the quality of experience may not be only rebuffering, startup time, etc., the usual metrics that NPO provides to most of our customers. But really adding a new KPI on latency, I believe this will be key for our customers in the next few, I don't know, months, years.
So Dom, I'm going to share real quick here. I don't know if everybody can see this or not. This is another one of the questions from State of Streaming. And Damien, I share this directly to your point. Latency is important, but obviously you can see there's a whole lot of other things, as you say, buffering, video quality, etc., that people, and scalability, that people say, look, these are things we need to also solve. If it's low latency at the expense of these other things, I don't think anyone in the industry will find it acceptable. So,
what was the sample group for that data we're looking at?
So each of the State of Streaming surveys get sent out from streaming media.
It's streaming media readers, basically.
Yeah, it's people in the industry who were asked to essentially, for their video service, tell us the challenges they have to deal with. Yeah, this is not consumers.
Understood. Yeah. I mean, if I can add from a consumer side, in terms of home viewers, I feel like the latency expectation is driven depending on what the content is. If you're comparing it to a broadcast, IPTV provider, cable provider, that sort of thing, then yeah, your expectation is 3 to 5 seconds. If you're comparing it, if you're a big esports fan and you're comparing it to Twitch, that expectation is probably more in the 2 to 3 second range. So right. I feel like that, there's a case to be made for 2 to 3 seconds to be the standard for, to compete on certain levels without pissing people off because they're a couple seconds delayed from their buddy who's watching the same event, that sort of thing. And that's really where the rubber meets the road is, did someone see the touchdown before I saw the touchdown?
Well, and it's interesting that you say that, Mark, because I remember when I wrote the article a couple of years ago about the Super Bowl streaming fail, one of the early attempts at it, what was happening there was it was sort of consistently 20 seconds behind, which frustrated people to begin with. But as the action increased, meaning you got close to halftime, you got close to the end of the game, the latencies actually stretched out to close to 2 minutes. So the more people who came on the system, the latencies actually grew and grew. So I remember watching the 2-minute warning on the streaming platform after the game was already over. And yeah, that we were sitting there with cable television watching it on the stream and just realizing how far apart that had been and how frustrating an experience that was.
I'm going to be a pain on this topic. So latency, the recent couple of years of discussions about latency are kind of, sometimes I just raise my eyebrow because it's like the question I asked, what's his name, Apple chap, Pantos, once you've got low latency, why would you have high latency? And it's an interesting debate, the way the the whole thing's been taken to market as a value proposition, as if it's difficult to get low latency. It's quite easy to get extremely low latency, much, much lower latency than 3 seconds, 1 second, tips. You can get down to 100. I've been looking at some gigging systems which are trying to target 50 millisecond latency. That's possible. But then you start with almost, every packet of data carries your full video frame, job done. That's it. You've got one packet transfer of latency. But what you start doing is introducing buffering so that you don't have problems when you have jitter on the network. You start introducing more delay because you want to encode bigger GOPs with higher quality images in them and so on. So actually, the question is, how much latency do you want to introduce? Because these other KPIs are important, not, oh, we must reduce latency, reduce latency, reduce latency. It's sort of a bit focused the wrong way. If you need low latency, it's there, but there's going to be sacrifices for your use case. For example, there's factories which do the monitoring the labels of the Coke bottles going on, and they're doing 50,000 images a second or 5,000 images a second, and they're able to make a decision in 2 meters of the bottles going down the factory line to whip the bottle out of the chain. That's an ultra low latency video solution. And it's a streaming one, and it's very possible, but it's not particularly scalable, and it's got all sorts of trade-offs like quality and so on. So I think the latency argument always has to be coupled with what's the use case. What are the things that are going to be traded off by just chasing latency? And it's quite possible to chase it as one of the vectors, but I find it a strange question when people sort of try to look for a standard latency. I don't know what's the standard business case.
Like I said, yeah, it depends on the content. And I think the pie chart that Tim just showed, those are the 4 metrics, and it's a different, balance of those metrics depending on what kind of content you're talking about, really.
And also remember, sorry, Damien, let me just add one other point. Remember, I wrote this article 12 years ago. We painted ourselves into a corner with HLS by saying, look, rather than having streaming servers that focus on delivering at scale at reasonable latencies, let's go to these generic web servers and add the 30 seconds of latency. It's almost like we're now giving back to people what we had all that time ago. And oh, by the way, RTMP has survived that whole thing and is still there from an ingest standpoint. So sorry, Damien, go ahead.
Yeah, because I believe if we look at those 4 different factors, if we look at the video quality, I believe the industry has pretty much agreed on a number of different things regarding video quality, GOP size, the kind of codecs that could be used, and so on, which somehow frame some ideas around latency. So it's probably acceptable that an encoder adds a latency of 500 milliseconds in the use case of delivery of a, let's say, TV service to a large population. This is really the use case I would take. And in that use case, the encoders, obviously they have different latencies, but let's say most of them would be between half a second to 2 seconds. If anyone comes up in the industry with an encoder that does much better video quality, but with 10-second latency, this is not going to work, not at all. So this is really for the video, let's say, the video quality. But then I believe the real challenge of the industry nowadays is on the scalability part. And this is the whole reason why HLS was actually invented, in order to have an easy and scalable solution. And that worked out, but to the price of latency, because with the initial 10-second based HLS, the latency was much more in the 40-second than in the one we're seeing now, which is much more like 10 to 15 seconds, but still, it's too high a latency, which is a reason why both HLS and Dash had to evolve to newer standards that nowadays allows to get back to, let's say, a couple of seconds for the delivery part. So a couple of seconds for the encoding, couple of seconds for the delivery. We're back to the 3 to 5 seconds we mentioned before. And this makes the whole OTT solution something viable.
So I think to your point, to the point that Dom made earlier, we've had the technology to have very, very low latency solutions for a very long time. And it's just been a matter of scale. And I think the reason why we kind of started along this line of conversation was to Correct me if I'm wrong, Tim, but I think we're going to talk about low latency at scale. Have there been innovations very recently that provide, better ability to provide low latency video at scale? And I don't know the answer to that. Damien?
Oh, yeah. I believe that both HLS low latency, which is part of the latest iOS releases for, I believe, 2 months now, as well as the dash SMAF low latency, which is around now for at least a year, available on the devices. But both of those technologies actually enable low latency at scale. And which is a reason, I was mentioning before the work we've done with Canal Plus. This is ongoing for years, but it's only now that this is possible at scale with millions of users. So this is happening nowadays, while OTT services have been launched years ago. So finally we're there.
I share that with you, Damien. We've had demos of low latency HLS, low latency dash running on Akamai. It's Akamai. How big do you want to scale? We've had that running since the beginning of the year, but we're not exactly getting people banging down the door. So I'm delighted then that you're actually starting to see top line customers coming to market with product, because that's what it needs. It's more of a demand. We had WebRTC up and running at scale on Limelight year before. We can now do Akamai scale, low latency, LLHLS and LL dash. That's out there. It's possible to use it. We just need to see the people turning it on, really. Yeah,
but it's only possible since the beginning of the year, basically, with demos.
January.
And that was demos. So, real broadcast systems running 24/7.
I think that's what I'm getting at. What happened at the beginning of the year that made it possible? HLSLL, the standard, has been out for quite a while. So what was the innovation? Was it just adoption, or what turned the corner?
I wouldn't say that HLS low latency was around for quite a while, because the first version was basically a complete mess. It didn't work at all. Okay. It didn't work out at all. So they had to basically rewrite the standard.
The further refinement of that standard and of SMAF, the SMAF standard as well.
Okay. And it's only until the past iOS release that it's available to every users. So the demos at the beginning of the year were on specific iOS releases, but not general availability.
One of the other stats that came out of this survey, and if people want to see it, we'll be doing a report in the next few weeks. One of the other questions was, what would you use something like a WebRTC at scale for? And what's fascinating is we asked a series of questions, one of which was few to many. So essentially this a kind of talk show, basically, with a few people on it, and sending it out so that people can do real-time interaction back or close to real-time through polling or chat, etc. Another was a few to few, like a Zoom. That was actually lower down the list than I expected. Another piece was watch parties. And I think this is really fascinating, because we all like our movies, but we can't necessarily go to the theaters at this point. And especially if you're in other locations, you can't. But the whole idea of doing watch parties with your friends to watch the new release of, whatever, Eternals when it comes out on Disney Plus, and do the Mystery Science Theater 3000 kind of commentary about it with your friends, that's a really interesting use case for low latency. So that's WebRTC. I think those sort of few to few models, whether you call them watch parties or Zooms or talk shows, that stuff, Mark, has also reached a maturity. And we can't forget to say the words peer-to-peer, because that also still comes into play on some of those WebRTC solutions. And I think it's been acceptably rebranded as WebRTC, hiding the peer-to-peer assist.
Loki DuPont just chipped in. Isn't the main requirement for low latency that latency is similar between all users and between OTT and broadcast?
Yeah, so and that's a slightly different. That's a slightly different topic, because we also have a topic nowadays which is synchronizing different screens, and in that use case of a watch party, it may not be a live event. So we're not talking about latency anymore. We're really talking about synchronized streaming, which is also something that happen if you want to have a multi-view sports event like a Formula One race where you have one screen with one car and another screen with another cockpit view. In that case, you cannot afford having 1 second delay between those two screens. So what you really want to achieve in that case is not about latency. It's about synchronized streaming or actually synchronized playback.
And even for live streaming, that we talked about that in the keynote on Monday, that there are these two pieces. There's latency and there's synchronization. Ideally, a lot of use cases for synchronization, whether, as you say, Damien, it's on demand or live. But if we can find a sweet spot between low enough latency that maintains synchronization across devices, I think that's an area where the industry can really grow into.
And that's one of the areas where we really need those KPIs and those metrics from the players. They are not only interesting, but they are actually absolutely required, because if you want to find that sweet spot, actually you have to look at what's the average latency and what is acceptable, and on which latency can you actually synchronize all the different users. But so in order to do that, you have to get everything.
Nak, we're looking at you and the work you do. You're a challenge here.
But I'm understanding here that there is a lack of perhaps benchmarks, and this is what Damien is trying to get. Oh, sorry, I have my dog. Hello. So I can understand that the lack of metrics and benchmarks and standards in the industry for this, and that it's a question of balance rather than fixing just one issue, which is the low latency we're talking about here. Not fixing something at the expense of other, elements. So I'm hoping that this was a nice summary.
That's a very good summary. And to Mark's point, we have those pieces constantly pushing against each other. What do you give up to gain on the other? Can we find a balance between those that's sort of optimal for the industry? So,
correct. And I guess it depends on every business's goals. At that point, you might want to focus on something else, and maybe low latency is not a problem to tackle. So I'm guessing it really depends on the business and their growth or whatever they have on their roadmap.
Very true. Dom, we are at the end of an hour. And
I'm sorry to do the T sign in the background there, but we've overrun. And although I always feel like SMAF should be 2 hours. We've only invited our lovely guests for an hour, and we shouldn't grill them because it's probably late for dinner over there. Certainly my missus is messaging me saying dinner's on the table. So it's time to inch away. But Tim, why don't you see us out? And we should plug anyone who wants more. There's 8 hours of Content Delivery Summit all day on Monday. So please do tune in to there. Damien's going to be on. I believe you're on a panel. Tim's going to be co-hosting with me. Nak and Mark, I'm sure we'll see you in the audience and in the chat room. So that'll be good. And then we're going to be at IBC. I will be on the beach at 4 o'clock on Friday. And I think Damien's made a commitment to turn up, and hopefully the others will turn up too. Maybe Nak and Mark and Tim will be there. But I think with that, let's just do
in spirit, certainly.
Spirit, brilliant. Excellent. Well, since the camera's on you, Mark, give us a wave. Oh, no, it's not now. Hold on a minute. I'm going to have to do that. There you go. Give us a wave.
Bye-bye.
The runaway, otherwise we're going to be going all night. And Damien, are you there? Let's go. Oh, look, I added a spotlight. That's a new feature I haven't played with there. I'm going to remove you, Mark. Bye. Give us a wave, Damien. That's
goodbye, everyone.
I'll see you on Monday at Content Delivery Summit. Thank you for your time.
Monday.
Excellent input to the conversation. And Nak, thank you very much for joining, not just us here at SMAF, but the industry, and you'll be a welcome face on the show floor. I hopefully will see you at IBC. That would be great. And last but not least, our illustrious MC. Well, I shouldn't say last but not least.
Here's my job. I've got RAM to go through after we get off the call. So
you're counting those.
How old is that RAM?
Some of this RAM is probably 15 years old. There's a little dust on it. It's like fine vintage RAM. So
good stuff. Good stuff. Love the smell of old RAM.
I like the dusty smell as it fires up. That's just awesome. It's like valves all over again. Well, once again, thanks to SMAF fans. We'll see you next month. I think I'll be trying to get live from IBC the night before the beach. So assuming that's the case, we'll be there. Well, I'll be there. Maybe some of the rest of us will be there. If we are, we'll be tucked into a very unsalubrious, easy hotel because I'm on the cheap this year because it's last minute.
The only thing, Dom, is it needs to be quiet and there need to be no people running around in the background. That's all I ask. And hopefully a long way from a canal. With that, thank you very much. See you later.